Welcome back to Old School Sports and our franchise Hockey Manager 9 playthrough of the Chicago Blackhawks. We are about midway through the offseason, and it has been a very busy offseason for the Blackhawks, at least in terms of the top end talent that we've added to the team. Picked up two of the handful of best players on the market in free agency, in our opinion. Basically, have used up all of the salary cap space that we have creatively engineered over the past several seasons. We added Quinton Byfield, who probably was the top player on the market for 8.25 million for 3 years. A potentially very dynamic offensive player with excellent physical skills, good mental ratings, and he's respectable defensively as well. Does have a tendency to get banged up a little bit, so that is not optimal, but we will deal with that. And then we also added Matty Beniers, another center slash left winger. Similar profile, actually. Really good offensively, physically, and mentally. Not quite as good defensively, but still a solid player. And definitely feel like with those two on board and the potential for some youngsters to contribute to our team this season, that our depth will be a little more. We also have signed one of our former draftees, a guy who really kind of developed out of nowhere. Roy Chung was a guy who we drafted in the fifth round out of St. Thomas University several years ago. It might have been 4 years ago, right when he was headed into college. Yeah, 2024 draft, picked him in the fifth round. And at least according to our scouts, he's developed into a pretty decent prospect. So we are going to likely have him in the minors this year. You can see we've got him assigned to the ECHL for the time being. That can change. He'll certainly be in camp with us in a month and a half when we start getting ready for the season. Think he's going to have a tough time making the 23-man roster this year. But Rasmus Anderson, another right defender, is 31 years old in the final year of his contract, making $5.5 million a year. And then another right defender of ours, David Jaracek, is also in the final year of his contract and is currently involved in a dispute with another young defender on our team, Matteo Rotundi, who we have signed for 5 years. So conceivably, we could be moving on from Anderson and or Jaracek over the next year at the longest, and maybe earlier, which could give Roy Chung an opportunity to contribute at the NHL level sooner rather than later. So happy to have all of those players on board, and think that we are kind of in a win now mode with the Blackhawks. We do have three relatively expensive and talented players in the last year of their contract. Rasmus Anderson, who I already mentioned, and then two other 31-year-olds in Dylan Larkin and Adrian Kemp. So the good news is that will open up some money for us for free agency next year, although we have given extensions to some of our other players whose contracts are up, notably Nathan Villeneuve, Linus Eriksson, Victor Eklund, and backup goalie Philip Svedebak. So those guys will all be making more money next year than this year, which will use up some of the money that's coming off the books. But we're still going to have money to spend next off season. But given that we've got these guys in their 30s in the last year of their contract who have at times been very effective players in the NHL and have had their stretches with us, particularly Larkin, who had some great seasons with us before injuries really started to hit him the last few years. Scored 45 and 53 goals his first 2 years with the Blackhawks, which were the most productive goal-scoring years of his career by far. But you can see 10, 28, and 16 the last 3 years with lots of injury issues. So it'll probably be tough for us to bring him back at a big salary number next year as he heads towards his mid-30s and is already an injury risk. But I like the team that we've got potentially on the ice over the remainder of the offseason. Going to certainly look if we can add some organizational depth, players that will hope to be able to sneak to the AHL for the inevitable injuries that will occur, and hopefully can find some players like that, both on the blue line and at forward, who can give us some organizational depth and potentially play a role on the NHL team for when we get to January and February, and we probably got 3 or 4 guys on the IL. And we put a couple offers out there just to increase our organizational depth, taking a look at some of the guys who are in our minor league system who are nearing the final year of their contract. Both of our AHL goalies, Drew Comesso and Ryerson Leanders, are in the final years of their contract. Given that Leanders is 4 years younger and less disappointed with the fact that he's in the AHL, we've offered him an extension. And then we also offered Lou Levesque, a former draftee, a 2-way contract extension. Signed him officially last year, played in the ECHL for us last season. He's the definition of organizational depth. Don't think he's ever going to be a major contributor at the NHL level, but we'll probably bump him up to the AHL this year, particularly if we re-sign him to the extension. And given that he can play anywhere on the front line, if we do have injuries 2 or 3 years from now, could see him coming up and being a guy who's kind of the 22nd or 23rd man on the roster, plays every week, week and a half, 2 weeks, depending on our schedule, in the situation where we have a lot of injuries. So neither of those is going to change the world, but wanted you to know that we did make offers there. And then we also made offers to a couple of other free agents. If I could click on the right screen, I could show you what we have done. Made offers to Harry Nancy and Vincenz Rohrer, both looking for entry-level contracts. Rohrer was never drafted at his age, only a 1-year entry level. Nancy had been a 4th-round pick, I think, of the Rangers several years ago. They didn't sign him. Neither of these guys, looks like they're going to be huge players for us, but do think that they both have the potential to, again, be organizational depth. If we have a bunch of injuries, get them on 2-way contracts for the next 3 years or the next year. And there may be a situation where if we have a lot of injuries, they can contribute at the NHL level. And then there's always the possibility that one of them develops into more than what we really think they are right now. I don't think that's likely, but you never know. And we did end up getting the extension signed with Leanders and Levesque. Rohrer and Nancy both just ended up ghosting us. They said that our offers were fair, and they were going to sign with us. And it looks like Rohrer ended up going up to EHC Winterthur, Nancy to Kunlun Red Star. So they never had the common courtesy to come back to us and tell us that they weren't going to sign with us. But that does make me, a little more intrigued in maybe trolling the bottom of the free agent barrel here on September 1st and seeing if there's anyone out there who can, again, help the back end of our potential roster, or most likely our AHL roster. So we're going to keep looking if there's any modest opportunities to improve the organization as a whole. Probably not anyone all that exciting out here at this point in the offseason, though. And Kimo Gruber is a restricted free agent. The Sabres have the rights. He's looking for $750,000 for 3 years. We're willing to give him $950,000 a year as long as he's on a 2-way with us, because he'll probably end up being in the minors. Guy who can play both center and right wing. Tend to think that the Sabres will match that offer. Oh, he says he doesn't want a two-way, so maybe we won't be bringing him on board. We'll offer him a little more if he's in the minors. Well, looks like he's going to play hard to get. Okay, on a two-way deal, I guess you're going to stay unemployed, Chemo. And we did finally sign somebody on a entry-level contract that's a two-way, Noah Dower-Nielsen. Going to be coming over from Europe. He can play center or left wing. Certainly going to be in the AHL for us. Doesn't look like he's got much room to improve here. Potentially a decent offensive player. Doesn't bring a ton to the table in terms of his physical, mental, and defensive ratings. Pretty mediocre to average, if those words actually mean different things. In all of those categories. So it doesn't really stand out. Again, more just organizational depth, but we signed him for 2 years, $750,000 if he's on the NHL roster, $62,000 if he's in the minors. Don't know that he was ever actually drafted in the NHL. Yeah, he was projected to be the number 125 pick back in 2023. And was never actually drafted by the National Hockey League. So a little organizational depth. Unlikely he's going to make a big impact for us, but if we have some injuries, he can at least play a couple of positions on the front line. Also been looking for another defenseman to kind of serve a similar role for us. There's just not a lot out there. There's a couple older players who would sign for the minimum, but wouldn't go on a two-way contract. And given that those guys are unlikely to make our roster, would just prefer the flexibility of having guys on two ways. And who knows whether they can make it through waivers to the minors anyways. So not going to chase after people, as we talked about, in terms of the guys we have under contract among our defensemen. We've still got Wilsby, who has spent some time in Chicago over the last few years, Buksowski, Xavier Veilleux, who we recently signed, another former first-round draft pick of ours, who finished up his college career at Harvard, and we signed him then. And then we talked about Roy Chung also, who's in the minors with some potential for us. So I feel like we've got enough bodies if we do have some injuries, or even if we decide we need to move on from Mr. Jaracek because of the problems him and Mr. Rotundi have. But looks like I can intervene in that again, so that's good. Knock the tension down between the two of them another notch, which is always positive. And we've made it to the start of the preseason. You can see we've got 37 players on the roster now, so we're going to take a look at a lot of players, particularly some of our young players in camp. You can see we've got about a dozen guys who are 22 or younger who are going to be in camp. All of them obviously aren't going to make the team, but you can see a lot of them qualify as rookies potentially for this coming season. Be good to get a look at them in camp. We also, with the departure of Bo Horvat, need to assign a third captain. Mitch Marner, who's got 2 years left on his contract, is wearing the C. Dylan Larkin, in the final year of his contract, is one assistant captain. So we'd like to find someone who is a pretty talented player who we also have signed for multiple seasons. The new addition, Quinton Byfield, would be an obvious prospect. Really good in terms of his team player, leadership, temperament, and professionalism. He is a new addition to the team, though. So Quinn Hughes, another prospect, a guy who's been with us several years, and we've got him signed even longer. And his leadership is not quite as high, but team player, temperament, and professionalism, all really good. I think we're going to go ahead and make Quinn Hughes, who's been with us a while, as our second alternate. And given the likelihood that we'll be moving on from Mr. Larkin at the end of this season anyways, should be an opportunity for the immensely talented Mr. Byfield to have a letter on his chest next year in his second year with the Blackhawks. And the early stages of training camp in the preseason have been very good for the Blackhawks. Won our first 5 games, have 2 left at Edmonton tomorrow, and then at Philadelphia, first day of October. And then we'll have a nice break to go through waivers before the regular season starts. Some modestly bad news. Quinn Hughes, our newly named assistant captain, going to be banged up with a sore back. He just returned from international duty, so he hasn't even played with us yet in this preseason. So we won't get any preseason action from him. Basically just putting him on the injury list just to clean up the roster a little bit. The only other injury that we experienced was Mathis Dubé, day-to-day with a corneal abrasion. So the expectation is that both of them will be back with us long before the regular season begins. Obviously, wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world if Hughes could have gotten in these next couple of games to at least skate with his NHL teammates once or twice before the season started, but he's been here for several years. Not really worried that no action in the preseason is going to be a big issue for him. And as we get to the end of the month of September, some interesting stuff to look at. The training camp development report. I always want to see some of the youngsters getting some good development. Beniers and Boisvert. Tyson Buksowski improved in 3 areas. Goalie Drew Comesso, good camp for him. Victor Eklund, the young sharpshooter, improved his shooting accuracy. Always nice to see. Julian Mays, former first-round draft pick, probably not going to make the team, at least initially. Needs a little seasoning in the minors, I think, but good to see him having a nice camp. Nazar improved a little bit. Rotundi, backup goalie Sveta back with a good camp. And then some of the younger players who we have rights to from having drafted them in the past look like they've also experienced some good growth. Not shockingly, that some of the guys who are now 32 years old, Adrian Kemp and Dylan Larkin, both kind of moving in the wrong direction. Defensive read in terms of Kemp, stamina in terms of Larkin. Not shocking for players in their early 30s. As we've talked about, both of those guys are in the last years of their contract. Given that we are built to win right now and just about at the salary cap, and particularly because right wing is a bit of a weakness for us. No real desire to move on from Kemp or Larkin, but it is likely to be their last season with us as we try to make a run with the Blackhawks in this upcoming 2028 to 2029 NHL season. Separately from that, we'll take a look at the season ticket numbers. Over 18,000 in the United Center. I'm guessing that's probably the best in the NHL. It has been for most years. Yep, once again, with over 18,000, the Blackhawks with the best season ticket sales in the NHL. And if you've been watching and listening closely, you'll know that we are in the midst of constructing a new stadium. Despite the financial success we've been having with the United Center, the old school sports arena is set to open or set to be finished July 1st, 2029, right at the start of the offseason. So obviously it's only September 30th. We've got a lot of time to get that completed and hopefully make a long run in the playoffs, but we'll have a shiny new facility for the Blackhawks next season, not this upcoming season. And we did end up losing the final 2 games of the preseason, so we finished with a 5-2 record. Obviously don't love heading into the regular season with 2 straight losses, but I also wouldn't have loved it if we were 7-0 in the preseason. I think that is a jinx if you don't lose it all in the preseason. Taking a look ahead to the the schedule for the month of October here, we're only going to have 3 home games against the Blue Jackets, the Bruins, and the Avalanche. 6 games on the road, 3 at home when we do get the season started. So hopefully, if we can, somehow string 5 wins in the month of October with 6 of those games being on the road, that would be a pretty successful month, I think, for these Blackhawks. But we're going to focus on the actual start of the regular season in our next episode. Right now, we're focused on making some final cuts. As you know, we do have Dubé and Hughes, both of whom will ultimately be on the 23-man roster. Well, Hughes certainly will be. Dubé almost certainly will be. So we're not going to have perfected the roster when we make this round of cuts. Clearly, Wallstedt and Svedebak are going to be our 2 goalies. So easy decision to demote Ryerson Leanders down to the AHL. Korchinski, Coughlin, and Rotundi are safe. We'll keep up Buczkowski for now, but that spot will likely be taken by Quinn Hughes before the season is done. Xavier Veilleux, the rookie that we signed out of Harvard, former first-round pick, really like him. We're going to start him in the ECHL, but he's probably only going to be there for a few weeks, but like to kind of toughen guys up in the ECHL before they get to the somewhat cushier accommodations of being an AHL player. And obviously the NHL players have it the best. So the right defensemen, Anderson, Jaracek, and Rinzel, all going to be back. Roy Chung, similarly, we're going to start him for a little while in the ECHL, but he will be up in the AHL very shortly. Going to be just short stints for both of those real good prospects in the ECHL, just to show them what life is like there. Before they move on to the AHL, probably, before the end of November, certainly before the end of the calendar year. Turning to our forwards, and we may ultimately have some difficult decisions here, particularly once Dubé is ready to come back, but for the time being, among our left wingers, Julian Mays, another guy, had a monster year in the WHL last year with 58 goals. Former, I believe he was a first-round pick of ours. Yeah, 15th overall. That's a solid first-round pick. Similar to the other prospects we talked about, toughen him up. Down with the Indy Fuel for a while in the ECHL, but probably will be in the AHL before too long, given his skill set. I guess it's positive when you've got a decent amount of players still on international duty, but unfortunately similar to the situation with Quinn Hughes, who came back with an injury, Byfield, Larkin, and Marner. Canada and the U.S. have done well in the, I believe it's World Championships going on now. What is it actually going on? Is it the World Cup? Sorry, not the World Championships. The World Cup going on. I was going to say, didn't seem like the right time of the year for the World Championships. Anyways, so Byfield, Larkin, Beniers, Sillinger, and Villeneuve all going to make the team, which lets us make some easy cuts at the back end of the roster. Dower Nielsen, who we did bring over from, I believe, the Swiss League. Swedish, sorry. My bad. So we will start him in the AHL. He's younger. He's older than some of those other guys that we sent down to the ECHL, so we'll start him right in the AHL. Similarly, Boisvert and Forlin, 2 guys who we have signed. Boisvert making his professional debut, so he's headed down to Indy with his young counterparts. Forlin is a player who split last year between the ECHL and the AHL, so we're going to send him back down to the AHL. One cut still to make at this time. Shields, Marner, Kemp, and Nazar are all safe. Honestly, Evan Kanyan and Jordan Forget, probably both going to be cut ultimately. Only one of them needs to be cut right now, though. So the youngster, actually, Forget is a better player, so we're going to send Kanyan right back down to Rockford in the AHL. That gets us to a 23-man roster. Salary on it is only $61 million, but that's because actually that can't be right. That's because of all the players out on international duty. I was going to say I knew Hughes hit a big contract on the injured list, but Dubé is not making that much. But obviously we don't have the likes of Marner, Larkin, and Byfield's dollars in there also. So we are going to be likely right at the cap once those guys are back. We had planned it out. I think we'll be fine. May need to shift around with a decision on a 22nd or 23rd player to ensure that we are under the cap when all is said and done. But right now we've kind of got it down to an original 23, but with a captain and an excellent offensive defenseman and a versatile forward with some NHL experience coming back, would certainly expect that Mr. Buksowski's roster spot and Mr. Forget's roster spot probably will not last very long. The other guy who's certainly in jeopardy, though, is Linus Eriksson, the young player we signed this past offseason. Actually, we didn't sign him this past offseason. We signed him to an extension this past offseason, but we had loaned him back to his home team the last couple years, wanted him around. So one of those guys is actually probably going to make the 23-man roster, but will not likely be getting a ton of playing time. So we're going to have to figure out which way we want to play that. Do we want the better prospect up in the NHL not playing as much, or do we want the better prospect down in the AHL, maybe a little upset with the organization, but at least getting some more regular ice time? And I'm not expecting us to make any big moves in waivers, given our expectation that we're going to be right up against the salary cap, but we'll certainly keep an eye on the waiver wire, and if we think there's someone who can help us, aren't going to be afraid to jump in. And it looks like here the conflict between Rotundi and Jaracek is easing before the season starts, which is good. Gave us the opportunity to intervene again and get it down to almost nothing. So don't feel like we have to dump either of them right now. And as we've talked about in the past, Jaracek is likely the guy that we would dump, simply because Rotundi is a little bit better player, and we've got him signed for 5 years, former first-round draft choice. Jaracek is a guy that we picked up off of the waiver wire. He's been really good for us. He's a versatile guy who can play both right and left defense. Played 51 and 57 games for us the last couple years as a 6th, 7th type defenseman for us. Definitely has some value, but does not have the same kind of upside in our view as Matteo Rotundi does. And there's a lot of players going through waivers, including some with a little bit of upside. Noah Ryan certainly looks intriguing on paper, given that we felt like there were 2 young wingers on the bubble. And he's making close to the NHL minimum, Major League minimum. You can tell that I do a lot of baseball videos. I don't love the fact that he's well above the minimum salary. Don't love the fact that he's making the same in the minors that he would be in the NHL. given that we were so close on the cap, I do worry that we might not be able to fit him. And I'm kind of okay going with some of the young guys as our 22nd and 23rd guys on the roster. Not that Ryan at 23 is an old guy. But we'll take a look through the rest of the guys who are on the waiver wire. If there's anything exciting, maybe we'll make a move. But I tend to think we're going to likely run with the crew that we have here at this point. Yeah, we didn't really see anyone who was that exciting to us. So Hughes somehow got put back on the roster. I didn't do it, but we'll put Dubé back on the active roster too, since our expectation is when we play our first game. Still, I believe, over a week from now, he should be back and healthy. Just make sure that our salary numbers work out. So Buksowski goes down to Rockford, and then we finally have that final decision about which winger is going to get sent down. Linus Eriksson or Jordan Forget. And I think, given the fact that Forget at least played in the United States last year, you can see what I talked about doing with the others. He was pretty good with 7 points, including 4 goals in 9 games in the ECHL in his professional North American debut. And then we moved him right up to Rockford, where he was pretty productive for us. I'm going to start Eriksson off in the AHL to give him a little more playing time. We have signed him to an extension at this point. He's an established professional player, so I don't think he needs to go to the ECHL. So we're going to send him to Rockford. And that has us coming in at $82.3 million, so right under the cap with nobody on the injury list and all of our big salary guys on the team. So I love it when a plan comes together. And I'm looking forward to this season. I think that this team is ready to really compete for a title. I may be being optimistic. I'm sure I am being optimistic. But we got back to the playoffs last year. We've added a lot of high-level talent with the additions of Byfield and Beniers on the free agent market. And we've also still got a lot of young guys on this team who have come up through our system. We've got 11 guys who are 24 years old or younger. So there's some youth on the team, but there's also some high-level experienced quality on the team. And hopefully that'll be a good combination that can lead to a long postseason run for the Blackhawks in 7 or 8, 9 months. And we are at season preview time. As I've said, I am optimistic about the Blackhawks. Let's see if any of the prognosticators are optimistic about the Blackhawks. Whoa! They claim that we are the early Stanley Cup favorites. That is probably the kiss of death for us. But glad to see that there's some expectations this year for the Blackhawks. Thinking of expectations, take a quick look at our job security. The fans with the new season optimism, the signings of Byfield and Beniers, much better situation than we were at the end of last year. Ownership, job security is good. Higher expectations this year, expecting us to be in the top quarter of the league. So we're at a point where got to perform on the ice, but that's fine. As we've talked about, the locker room is harmonious now. That conflict between Rotundi and Jaracek from the offseason is almost dissipated, which is positive. Marner, Larkin, and Hughes, who are Perhaps not coincidentally, our three captains, good leadership in the locker room, Rotundi and the newcomer Forget popular, Kemp Sharangovich unpopular, and Methis Dubé is outspoken, but doesn't look like a really tough locker room at this point. Hopefully we can keep it that way as the season moves on. And with over a week to go to our first game, Quinn Hughes is fully healthy. Dubé ahead of schedule. So barring some weird injury in training, we should have this team at full health when the season begins. Question is how long we'll be able to keep them there. And Dubé is completely healthy now as well. So the team is in good shape. We still have several days until we begin our season. It's October 8th today, and the season doesn't begin till the 13th, home against Columbus. So got 5 days until then, but as I mentioned, the 23-man roster is healthy. The 23-man roster is just under the salary cap. Expectations are high based on the fact that we are viewed as one of the front runners for the Stanley Cup. So looking forward to a new season with the Blackhawks. We'll be jumping into the regular season in our next episode. Until then, thank you so much for watching and hope you have a great day.